Welcome to Trekspeak, the video podcast, available on iTunes and also at trekspeak.com. Now today I'm joined in person by somebody who has been on Trekspeak before via video Skype. You're now here with me live in person. This is where people think that I'm not actually from Ireland at all. I'm really from Burbank. And,
No, I thought you were going to mat me in here. I thought this was really Skype and we're just fooling everybody with a seamless seam here, split screen.
Absolutely, Larry Nemecek joining me live.
It's amazing how we've worked out our eye lines to where I'm matching yours, so this is incredibly... The tech on this is amazing. He's got it stitched together so well here.
Absolutely. Here we are in the local Radisson Hotel, and you're on a bit of a trip here to Ireland.
Yes, and it has nothing to do with Star Trek. That's what was great. So we had actually come into a week tour, and it's been lovely, and hadn't been here before. And wife wanted to come to Ireland. We both, as they say in the States, we both have some Scotch-Irish, which after I learned, I'd always hear my grandparents say that or parents say that, and then when I got old enough to know history, I'm like, how do you just lump them in together like that? But yeah, and so anyway, it's been a great week, and I thought, well, while I'm here, I'll try to meet up with some fans and whatever, so here we are.
Absolutely.
I was just kidding about that stitching together. We really are here together. Yeah.
Of course, I was talking to you a bit earlier, and I mentioned how, in fact, Ireland does have a place in Star Trek, unbelievably. There are several key moments that you could refer to as being Irish. I wanted to ask you, first of all, Next Generation, the episode Up the Long Ladder. Now, we had quite a few vagrants, shall we say, on the ship. Do you think they were actually from Ireland, or were they from some weird planet somewhere and just spoke like Irish people?
They were, well, the plot of the show was that was an Earth colony that set out and set down in different places and got isolated, and the one to bring Lloydie and the other guys. And one were the immigrants, and the other ones were the ones that became cloned to survive. And it was almost a schizophrenic show. It was really an odd bird. But the first end, I mean, you're watching, you're kind of laughing, and all of a sudden you're kind of going, wow, this is really, it was second season, so it was pre-Michael Piller, and Maury Hurley was trying to do anything they could colorful. Yes, that's an actual Irish beverage cart going by. You can tell by the lilt of the wheels.
Reality television.
Reality here. It's fresh, it's alive. So, there was still, it was almost original series-ish in a way of how they would kind of fall back into some things at times. So, no, they were human-based, but they had been on another colony planet or lost colony for a couple hundred years. But the basic thing was they kind of lapsed into some of the Irish stereotypes. And, the drunk, boozing dad and the strong Irish woman and the whole, sexy, strong Irish woman, and the dirty farm animals and the whole thing. I mean, on one hand, it was funny, and for Next Gen, that was so straight-laced. It was great to get any kind of humor into Next Generation at that time, or any time over the 7 years. But that was still amazing, the second season, and the fact that the ship was so starched clean and everything, and here you've got animals and all running around.
I was going to say, it's not as bad as Code of Honor. I mean, it wasn't that much of a stereotype.
Yeah. And again, that was another thing. It was kind of like they were all so into it, and they put it on screen, and they all went, oh my God, what were we thinking here? Or, or it was the case of, you have a left hand, a right hand, another left hand, another right hand, and you don't quite think when they all come together, this niche looks fine, this niche looks fine, production. You have a production meeting, but when you put all the pieces together, every once in a while there's a misfire, and sometimes it might be a big misfire. But no, going with Pour Up the Long Ladder wound up being way far that way, and Melissa Snodgrass, bless her heart, did not mean for the episode to come off that way, and that was one of who was the writer. She was a staff writer, producer, and was thrilled to be working with Star Trek. She'd done some novels, and was a rare chance for that to happen, a novel writer to be involved on script writing, and she was not real thrilled with the way it went that way with the stereotypes, and that was one of the straws that broke her back. As far as, there was kind of a general house cleaning from second season to third season anyway, and that just, her personal niche, that added to that. So.
I was going to say, at least Riker got some action in that one.
Yeah, right. The old, well, we're going to have Picard be the king, and Riker is the is the Kirk character. We'll give Riker the Kirk stuff from the original series. And that attitude was still hanging on then. So yeah. Yeah, foot washing, yeah.
I think some people were a little bit offended by it. Personally, I thought it was funny. I thought it was great. And there was a bit of ambiguity, as I said. I mean, were they really Irish? I mean, maybe they were long ancestors from way back or something.
Right.
Maybe they weren't quite as Irish as perhaps we all are here. But I don't know. Maybe we have to just forget about that episode. But I suppose going onwards as well, there were other references to Ireland. One of the most controversial, of course, being the High Ground, the Next Generation, where, of course, we saw that episode that predicted the reunification of Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while they would go out there with things like that. It's not. It's a step beyond saying, "Oh, baseball will disappear," or television will go away in whatever year it was in the 21st century. But every once in a while they would be daring and go throw that out, and at times not think it's amazing what they would have. Like when they did Sarek, it was like Star Trek continuity would get debated forever, and they had this huge argument about whether to say that to mention Spock or not in Sarek's episode, which was still season 3, and Spock and Leonard Nimoy were finally on the show in season 5, Unification. That was the big thing. And got to remember with Next Generation, now let's go context here, the big thing was you had McCoy in the pilot as an aged admiral. It was like, are we going to see any of the original series people cross over to Next Generation and kind of, make it solidify that? Because we had the old cast and the new cast, and that was all there was. We didn't have 19 different shows and 4,000 different regular characters yet. So it was a big thing, and short of having Leonard Nimoy on, having Mark Leonard on Sarek was a big deal. So it was this huge debate about whether, they wound up saying, I met you at your son's wedding. And there was a huge argument between Michael and Rick about that, and with the writers and all that. So backing up to, it's kind of funny how they would throw out the line about Irish reunification. Romulan unification was much bigger deal
at that point. Yeah,
Vulcan Romulan than the Irish, but that was kind of an odd little bird thing they threw out.
Of course, that episode actually was banned here. So if you wanted to watch that in its first run, you couldn't see it. It wasn't allowed to be shown on BBC here, because obviously you had the BBC Northern Ireland connection, and that would have meant it was on all over the UK as well as Northern Ireland. So we didn't get to see that here. Our own broadcaster, I believe they actually banned it as well. That ban recently then was rescinded, and we were allowed watch it. Maybe about 5 or 6 years ago they allowed it to be shown. I suppose it is a huge controversial point, predicting the reunification, everything that's gone on. But again, I mean, I always thought it was a positive message. I mean, isn't that something that maybe people would like to have heard, but I suppose controversial at the same time?
I hate to say this too, but I mean, you're saying that it's a lot like originally when Patterns of Force was on the original series in Germany. They have their ban against showing any Nazi symbols, and it was big news recently, just a few years ago, when they showed Patterns of Force the first time. Which, and I bet this is the same thing in your case. I know that fans make tapes and send back and forth over the ocean. So, and now we have everything can be digital and online and slip files back. But even in the 80s and 90s, people were making tapes and sending them over. So it's not like no one in Germany saw Patterns of Force. It's not like anybody here didn't see the High Ground.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knew it enough. The people that wanted it hardcore fan enough to know would do that. So, on one hand, it's not like it's totally out of it. But yeah, public discourse. And the sad thing, I hate to say this, is that the writers and intentions may have a little bit on the side, but it's of vital interest to you all from your perspective. But to whatever's happening in the States, those kind of sidebar things are kind of off the radar scope.
Absolutely.
No one is sitting around some office at Paramount or Paramount TV or distribution going, okay, now do we really want to go here with this whole Ireland situation? Do we really want to, you know?
A throwaway line.
Yeah, a throwaway line on the date, yeah.
As well as, I think, that ban, I think at some point they said, right, well, let's just cut the scene. Let's just cut the line. I think it was Data who says it, actually. And I think somewhere along the line they got sense and said, let's show it. I mean, it was portraying the future.
Yeah.
And it's not like they were talking about today, you know.
And when I say it's a throwaway line, I don't mean by the writers. I mean to all the suits, all the censor, anybody that had the right from the studio, or, well, they were syndicated, so there wasn't a network, but anyone from the studio or anyone who had the power to weigh in and say that, it was a throwaway in that it went past all that American perspective.
It's interesting you said then as well about the Nazi connection and that there were bands in Germany. Did that hold out for a long time? Because I mean, we saw Nazis even in Enterprise, didn't we? I mean, towards the 4th season, we had Stormfront where we had that planet.
That's a good question. Because the joke is, God, how many more times can Star Trek do Nazis?
Yeah.
And you had the Nazis in the game, the
Killing Game.
Killing Game, on Voyager. And we had the Klingon Nazi fighting was kind of bizarre. That was a great mental image, and I think it was they were so into it. I think it went right past a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I think by then they were so into they were cranking them out, and the world was so used to things being cranked out that. Because I was like, here's the next show coming up. Okay, it's going to be this and this. Oh, it's a 2-parter. It must be for a ratings season or ratings month. Okay. Oh, you get Janeway and a Klingon. Okay. Oh, we see Neelix and a Klingon. For holodeck play and the whole idea that we're going to have Klingons fighting Nazis with bat'leths should have been a very cool image. But I think everybody was just so into getting it done and getting it out. It kind of went by until at one point I was like. I got the appeal of that. At one point it was like, well, this will be wacky. Klingons and Nazis fighting each other. But it just kind of got, So, by the time, and thank goodness, I mean, that the original plan was to have that alien Nazi time, the temporal war kind of gone askew, was supposed to go on for several episodes. And when Manny came in, he said, let's cut this back to 2.
Right. Yeah.
But a good point. I don't know what the reaction. I don't know if the alien tangent. That's a good thing to research. Or some of our German friends, and we got to go to Germany for a lot of conventions. We have a lot of good. German
Very active over there, isn't it? You have the FedCon and you have lots of other conventions.
See, that's what. It's really funny to watch. We're just going everywhere with this conversation, I know, but. That was one thing that hit me when I got conscious and came to LA and started working with projects through licensing, where it wasn't just about here's the show. It's like, well, let's look at the bigger world of things here. And you find out that the big outside the US Canadian market, it's the UK and Germany, and then Australia to a lesser extent. And why is that? And why not like Japan and China, where you think they're so techie and love science fiction also. And it goes back to who was the people who were buying overseas shows in the early 70s. It's like, how did that generation of people in that country come up? What were they exposed to? Did they get to see Star Trek? Did the buyers of their TV channel, 1 or 2 channels in their country, the way it was done in the 70s and pretty much still today, although we're so global with satellites, it overrules that sometimes. But how were they allowed to see Star Trek, and how was it treated? Was it treated as a kiddie show? Was it treated as adult fare? Did it have respect from the media, or was it kind of blown off, which is how, and how was science fiction in general viewed by the culture? Mm-hmm. So, I think maybe if it had Jerry Lewis, France would have been more...
I'd say you're right.
Into it. But it's really, so now you're in the 90s and the aughts and the teens, and people are going, well, why is Star Trek so big in Germany? It's not big in Spain or France or Russia or Japan. And it's like, well, you go back to the 70s and 80s and see the TV buyers. Mm-hmm. And it's just how is it treated? Where was it bought? And when did they schedule it? And now since JJ's movie, there's been now it's kind of filtering through the global cultural consciousness that, well, Star Trek is this, and it's big bucks, and now and when JJ's, it was very interesting to see how they sold that movie. They had an incredible around the world marketing tour. They'd hop up in Singapore and they'd hop up in Melbourne, and they would Australia's a big market. They'd be in Japan, they'd be in Beijing, they'd be all these they're selling a movie, which they do anyway.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see if all the changes the JJ movie has done about bringing new fans in, if that would turn some heads in some of these markets. Because then it's all about, okay, this is a big hit, so what do they want to do to feed that? Well, just to make money and ride the wave of the moment, they're going to maybe go and book some of the original series and next-gen episodes or the other movies and show them in that market on their TV and back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they look at it as a big package, and then maybe by then it's not so much they're going against the grain of 30 years of neglect or misuse, and maybe by then it's so hot. that they'll actually get some people to program it right, get it to the right market, get the kids after school and in college and raise them up with it.
Yeah.
And all that. So anyway, this is turning into marketing, but that's why it happened. That's how Star Trek was reborn in the States. There was a guy, his name slips me, but there was one guy before Star Trek was even canceled who owned, if I'd known this, I would have, Westinghouse stations, I think. It's in Bob Justman's book. About
the Inside Star Trek
one. Inside Star Trek book, and Herb Solow. And they talk about, and his name escapes me, I'm sorry.
We'll check that out. We'll check that out.
Okay, yeah, please run a chrono. But he was smart. Before the show was over, before they ended the network run on NBC, he bought rights at a steal for his stations. He had a 5 or 6, 7, Westinghouse, I want to say maybe, station group in some of the big markets. And he was like, this is a great show. This should be on the afternoons for kids when they come home from school. And bang.
How important that.
And he had the original idea. His markets all took off. The minute Star Trek was canceled, he had the rights to run, Chicago, New York, whatever markets it was. And his ratings, the way they love to, what was it a year ago versus now? And his ratings were all like 400% higher than they were the year before with some old movie or some old rerun talk show or game show. And then other stations would say, oh, I want to do that. Get me that show. I'll run that show at 4 in the afternoon. Yeah. And bang, the rerun, and then, as they say, the rest was history.
It's true. We're on the precipice now, if you like, of this new movie, Star Trek 2. Would you refer to it as Star Trek 2?
Oh, God.
No?
I hope they have a real...
Yeah.
I mean, we were calling the original one Star Trek 09, so I kept calling it Star Trek 13.
Star Trek 13.
But it's the 12th movie.
It's the 12th.
So every time I say Star Trek 13, somebody goes, "No, it's Star Trek 12."
But are you excited about that? I mean, I can't really say I loved 2009. I feel like I came from the TV generation, the Rick Berman era, and part of me is a little bit sad actually that era is gone now. That I know people say, right, we're getting the same television week on week, and maybe it's a bit repetitive by the time it came to maybe Enterprise, but I kind of miss that time, and I don't feel like I connect quite yet with this new cast and movie. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, it's human nature. Okay. The original series was just 79 hours, 80 hours, but we had it for so long. You saw them constantly, so people memorized those shows really easily. After the 9 millionth, that's all you had. And the first movie that came out, you were so thrilled to have it, even though there was some little bit of disappointment. And then Wrath of Khan, but we had so many hours of the other TV, even though people were saying, oh, the shows are a little tired, they compete, you had 2 shows on at once, that was a wrong mistake to do and all that. But people, it's been long enough now with Enterprise canceled in 2005, I think a few things are happening. One, people are going, oh, I do miss my weekly Star Trek. People got so excited about the rebirth as a movie. The fans that weren't around the 80s when that's all we had was the original cast in a movie every 2 or 3 years. But that was even just motion picture, and then 2 and 3 and 4. And after Star Trek 4 was when Next Generation relaunched, partly because 4 was so successful. And the stations wanted more than 80 hours of shows to show. And then 5 and 6 happened with an overlap. But we don't think of those as fallow years, but they were. But then you thought, well, the TV cast is never gonna. They're older and they've got this stature, and they're not gonna go back and do a TV show again. And they wouldn't recast the roles back then because they were still so fresh and iconic, and they were still alive and vivid. So the best answer was to do Next Generation for TV and set it 80 years. And those people existed, but now we're 80 years beyond this, and that was the right idea. It was a genius idea to do it that way. So, I think a lot of people got so drunk with excitement in the desperation of having nothing. It's been great, and tons of new fans came in, and a lot of them have even gone over to soak up the original series and Next Generation, or the DVDs, or on Netflix, or however they can get it, whatever satellite they've got. But I kept saying, guys, remember, this is just a movie. Whether it's a hit or a flop, it's just a movie. It's 2 hours.
Yeah.
It'll be 2 or 3 or now 4 years between movies. And that's what happened. People woke up the next morning, hungover, and went, Oh, that was only 2 hours. I have to wait 4 more years to get 2 more hours.
Yeah.
And it's nothing about the movie, the quality. And it turned out to be, people have their quibbles and the whole canon thing, but it was excellent. You can't knock the fact that it made the most money ever.
Absolutely.
And well cast, and we can go on and praise the movie forever, and we can critique it both ways. But the biggest thing was, it dawned on people again, as some of us have been saying, Star Trek's, what's the phrase? Its first best destiny. Is as a TV series. That's how Gene created it. It's weekly cranking out shows to see your characters evolve and change and use that cool future projection technology and comment on our human condition and watch the characters have fun and do hopefully mind-blowing science fiction concepts occasionally, and just be overall be Gene's hopeful vision, into the future. And that's the Star Trek recipe. And that's not to sound crassly commercial about it. People will still say, even when people would knock Voyager or knock Enterprise, if they did, people, it's almost like half of them would say, but you know what, it's still the best thing on TV. Or you still can't find anything like that on TV anywhere else in any other format.
That's right, yeah.
And that's still true. And sad to say, the world has gotten a little darker since, we thought, post 9/11, the world's dark, and we'll do, DS9's coming true, and here's some raw edges on Enterprise. But we've gone... in the States anyway, we're like revisiting, some of us don't think we ought to be, but we're revisiting all kinds of social issues and things now that we thought were settled 40 and 50 years ago. And it's almost like we're as ripe now for the little morality plays of... I'm sorry, I'll take a breath here in a second.
Not at all. Keep going, yeah.
It's like it's as ripe now for the little morality plays of the original series and Next Generation and the others to extent as we were. It's almost like in the 80s and 90s we got a little pat. Oh, racism. Oh, economic injustice. Oh, healthcare. We're not so burning. Let's find the new future social issue to find. It's like, what? The old ones are still around.
Yeah.
And they're worth having a new skew on things. But sad to say, those things can still be relevant to people, in finding them. And if finding reruns isn't their thing from the 70s or the 80s or the 60s, something fresh and new right now with today's production technology will do the same thing. So we won't have real Star Trek back until the fandom and the excitement, until we have a weekly show on. And when that happens, that's perception and the suits and who's controlling the franchise, and
for a while they talked about doing maybe just made-for-TV movies, maybe straight to DVD, bring back characters from, we'll say, the Voyager timeline, if you like, and maybe you could have a mixture of guys from DS9 and Voyager, Next Generation. Do you think that's realistically possible, or do you think that's kind of off the horizon now with the movie being so successful?
Well, I think, 2 or 3 things. Like it or not, there is a perception by some, and I keep saying this too, everything in Star Trek is a pendulum swing. Even in the high times, even when they're just sitting down to figure out the next show, everything in Star Trek is a pendulum swing, like so much else in life is. And 1 minute it's old and tired, and the next minute, it's retro cool again. We went through that with the height of Next Generation. Oh, that original series. Look at those cheesy sets. Those plywood Christmas light sets. Oh, the pajamas. Oh, the mini skirts. And Next Gen was the hot thing. And then as the 90s wore on, it was like, oh, that Next Generation. Oh, they've got a therapist on the bridge. How 80s is that? Oh, the Hyatt Regency in space, the car. But those were all choices for a reason. And we laugh about having a therapist on the bridge. Well, what's the suicide rate for our soldiers, in all these wars we're in now? I mean, mental health of anyone, much less the military and the space service, would be a high key.
If anything, it was forward thinking, wasn't it?
Yeah. And, the carpeted walls and all that was intentionally to get away from the battleship. And yes, you bring your family, so you don't have to choose between your family and career. I mean, those were all intentional choices that Gene and the original crew made. But the fact that the original series, that became old and tired, and now by the 90s and the early aughts, and the fan films coming out and doing original series, and then eventually JJ's bunch thinking the best way to come in fresh with Star Trek was to revisit the original characters. By then, the 60s were retro cool, and Kirk and his babes, and look at the phaser, tricorder, communicator, all iconic images of American, world culture. They weren't the old yawn, make fun of thing It was, and each time I defend all of it. Like, it's all books on the shelf, guys. It's all Star Trek, and you may have your favorites and lessers, but it's like once you start pulling the threads out and unraveling something, it's like, no, it's all there, and that's the beauty. And if we ever get away from that, that'll be an undoing of Star Trek, I think, even if you're not a big canon background person, because part of the beauty of it is they have had a unified, which is why, as much as the comic book, like Batman and Superman, and they reboot every so often, Star Trek is not Sherlock Holmes or Tarzan. It's not Superman and Batman. It was not on the page. It was acted. The first time we met people, it was Shatner, Nimoy, Kelly, Doohan, Nichols, George, Walter, in those roles, doing those bits. We didn't get it off the printed page. So those are always going to be like, now, recasting the movie, everybody gets that. That was well recast. It was one of the strongest points of the movie. But it's different. So having this reboot every 3 or 4 or 5 years would kill Star Trek.
Yeah.
I think. And so now there are people talking about, what's the next big thing? Let's reboot Next Generation. Let's have Picard and Riker and Troy and reboot and have new actors play. And I'm just going, can we get back to having
new stuff?
Yeah, new stuff.
Yeah.
Let's not keep having new stories about fake people or fake stories about new people. Let's get back to filling, because there's tons of, Gene's Sandbox wound up, if it wasn't with the original series, by the time they set up the format with Next Generation and got the timeline fleshed out, it's like the sandbox is even huger now. The universe is huge, and there's all kinds of places to go.
I was going to say, I suppose we'll wrap it up here. I know you've got some things to do. We are in Ireland, you're on holiday. That's right. You're not working. So I was going to say to you, we were left...
I'm sorry, wake up. Everybody wake up.
We were left off by Voyager, and we saw them get home. And I suppose that's where my favourite timeline, a lot of favourite, people's timeline ended there, and that's all we got to see. I suppose 2 things about that. Do you think they should have run up to the end with maybe a 10-episode arc showing them getting home and all that stuff? And also, if Enterprise had followed that, was that a bad or a good idea? Do you think that would have killed it altogether?
Oh, you mean instead of being a prequel show?
Instead of being a prequel, if it had gone straight on.
See, I was the one that when I first came out to Hollywood and I was working on the companion book, and all the Ron Moore, Renee Echeverria, all those guys were saying, it's really, really hard to write Star Trek the way Gene set up modern Star Trek, because you've got perfect humans. Well, how do you have drama as a writer, as a dramatist, as a storyteller? You have to, all the drama, conflict has to be external unless you're very careful with it. And, they were almost, and they were talking about how many good writers come into Star Trek. They're great Hollywood award-winning writers, and they can't master that. And no matter what they've done somewhere else, that's a niche that Star Trek demands of itself and the audience demands. And if not, it's not Star Trek.
Yeah.
But how do you write drama and not have conflict with the main characters? So that baffled a lot of people. And a lot of the writers and producers would say it would be great to have a situation which was where DS9 came from. Well, let's mix the aliens and have an alien crossroads, and they won't all be perfect humans. But at the time, I remember thinking from 2 angles. One, I'm an old background fan, not a techie so much, but a background person. I mean, we were doing timelines in the 70s and 80s, so there you go. And realizing how many pockets, and I want this filled in, I want this gap filled, I want this gap filled. And one of the biggest ones was, it would be so cool to see the founding of the Federation and the Romulan War and all that, and go back to those times, and the first contacts of the races. So that was one thing I was looking forward to, and thinking, they're never going to do that, they're all just going to follow on and follow on. So 2 things, when I'd hear them talking that way, I would think, how cool to set a series in those times when they didn't know everything. They didn't know the prime directive. They didn't know the tenets of the outcomes, and they didn't have technology advanced. They didn't, they couldn't say Scotty saved my ass every week and have it happen. They didn't have transporters and holodecks and everything. So I thought it was a great idea. I just wish I had written that down and dated it in 1992 and 93 and 94. And then when the news of Enterprise came out, I was like, okay, great. If I had written that down, I could have claimed 10% or something, I guess.
There you go, yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then to hear fans go, Star Trek is always about moving forward. This is moving backwards. I don't like this. I was like, okay, it's all in the future. It's in our future, so shut up.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was like, this is and I want to see one around the BC time. I want to see the Enterprise B, Enterprise C's era, if not those ships, that time, because that's a whole unexplored era. Well, and then here's a bit, it's no secret now, but after Enterprise was canceled, the first year or two, Dave Rossi and Doug Mirabello and Jose Munoz, trying to find ways to keep things going, not unlike the 70s animation, had a great pitch, was going to do it on the old StarTrek.com of a web series, animated web series. And it was going to be set about 125, 150 years in the future. A lot of dramatic wrinkles to the Star Trek universe, but not so messed up that you wouldn't recognize. But it had a lot of boat rocking, that would shake things up, and actually kind of gone to a more boring, darker place with a captain trying to lead a crew back to the glory days. Not so much of, the glory days of the way the outlook and the optimism was, and that would have been and that was, that was about 100, 125 years up. So I don't know. It may be that we have to have a gap so that, from the 60s to the 80s, you couldn't help but do a new show between where the world had gone, the way technology had changed, and science, production techniques, just as a practical level. And you couldn't help but have a new show and reflect where the culture was at the time, and hopefully have some timeless elements to it. But it's hard to keep doing a show and keep pushing ahead, maybe without having a breathing space. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, Larry, again, I don't want to take all your time up here, so maybe we'll call it a night for the moment. And thanks so much for actually coming to this city, which is a rare treat to have someone like yourself here. It's not Hollywood, we're far away from Hollywood, but it's been a treat to have you here. It just worked. No, but and gosh darn, when you offered to fly us first class over here just for this 10-minute interview, how could I turn that down? No, it was great serendipity that we overlapped like this. So it was great to come over and meet you up just a few months after we introduced over the green screen. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Larry, thank you very much, and indeed, great week to answer your question. We had a great time this week. Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and well, you're flying back now. You're out of here just tonight. A couple more days. Couple more days, and you're out of Ireland. Yeah. And then over to back to convention season and back to some things going on, and our geek tours, not through Ireland, but the LA to Vegas geek tour for anybody wanting to go to Vegas or afterwards. That's still open just through the end of May, though. We're shutting that down. So geeknationtours.com. And I'm working on the Con of Wrath, so hopefully anybody around the world can be a fan donor to that, or if you're interested, follow along our progress as we work on that over the next year or so. And hopefully we've got a lot of conventions going on in the States, and hopefully get back over here this side of the pond sooner than later. It's been a while. I used to go to Germany every year, haven't been to the UK very often, and hopefully that'll change coming up soon. So excellent. Well, Larry, thank you very much for joining me. Darren, thank you so much for having me.